I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am Connor Ruebusch, your host, and with me is your co-host, should I just say other host, Patrick Wyman. Pat is slowly crumbling and dying as his baby slowly grows up. And someday, Pat, you and your child shall meet in the middle, and you will just collapse from the exhaustion of parenthood. Are you looking forward to that?
I would look forward to just collapsing because it would mean that I would be asleep, I think. And sleep is, I'll take sleep in any form that I can get it. Like, I never knew that sleeping for 4 hours at a stretch would be such an impossible luxury.
Oh, man. I sympathize with your situation, Pat, and also feel grateful that I'm relatively free. I went to a Labor Day celebration today. I played a game of volleyball, and then I had a little nap. So.
You had a little nap, you son of a bitch. You son of a bitch. You had a little nap. What is this? You're trying to rub it in on me? This partnership is over.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Well, okay, I know how to soothe the tensions, right? Let's talk about some fights. This is our bonding ground, Pat. This is what always brings us together. We have some good ones to discuss. UFC 203 is around the corner. I'm going to be going to this one live, so I am especially excited, but almost as disappointed that both Mirbek Taisimov and Jamir Hadžević are both off the card, because I was looking forward to seeing both of those guys in action live, and now I won't be able to. Fortunately, we still have heavyweight title on the line. Stipe Miocic, the first world champion really of any description from Cleveland, Ohio, my home state, for many, many years. And then, as fate would have it, shortly after he won his title, I think the Cavs went on to win whatever people win in that sport. I don't know. What did the Cavs win? Something?
The NBA championship?
What's it called, though? Is it like a cup or something like that?
No, it's just the
NBA championship? All right. So you can tell I know a lot about stick and ball sports, but now Cleveland is where it's at, and I'm looking forward to going there and seeing Stipe Miocic in action. I'm not entirely sure, Pat, that I will be picking him, though. And I've waffled on this one many times, as I think you knew, because I was waffling way back when Miocic won the title, and they talked about giving Alistair Overeem the first shot. So over the course of this first segment, we're going to hash this fight out, Miocic versus Overeem for the heavyweight strap. Segment 2, we're going to get into a little bit of a fight smorgasbord. We got 4 other main card fights that we're really excited to talk about. Fabricio Werdum versus Travis Browne, Urijah Faber versus Jimmie Rivera. That might be my personal favorite on the card. And then Jessica Andrade versus Joanne Calderwood. And then we'll get to some listener questions at the end of the show. But first off, like I said, let's talk about the heavyweight title fight. General parameters here, Pat. What do you see as the general dynamic in this fight?
Well, so it is Overeem's new commitment to playing a stick and move striking game versus Miocic's ability to either counter him when Overeem picks his spots to come in with something, or alternatively to pressure him. So I think that we're probably in fairly general agreement about the dynamics, but it's interesting that you're picking Overeem. I'm picking Miocic in this fight, though it's a very, very tight fight. And I can understand exactly why you would pick Alistair Overeem.
Yeah, this is not one, I think, and probably the reason we're not doing a punch-counterpunch for this. Like, this is not one where either of us has any strong feelings about who's going to win, I don't think. I can, or at least one where both of us can very clearly see the way in which the opponent wins. It is a heavyweight fight. The parity is very, very narrow at heavyweight already, but also we've got one of the most experienced fighters in heavyweight MMA history, in Alistair Overeem, with a very diverse skill set and a new approach to fighting that has been working wonders for him as of late, versus a fairly untested fighter whose style may actually give him the edge over Overeem. So since you're picking Miocic, Pat, why don't you go ahead and tell me off the bat, what are the things that specifically give Miocic an advantage over Overeem's new stick and move style in this fight?
Well, so I think first and foremost, it's his craft in the pocket and his subtle footwork, which allow him to slide in counters with a great deal of effectiveness. He has become a really, really good counterpuncher, really crafty, really technical counterpuncher, one of the very best in the heavyweight division. And I think that if there is a weakness to Overeem's new style, it's that he's hittable in those brief spaces where he's on his way in with a punch. So I think that Miocic, far more than most of the heavyweight division, can take advantage of that particular weakness. And if he does it enough times, then eventually one of those shots is going to land cleanly enough to catch Overeem's kind of glass chin.
Yeah. And Overeem, I mean, it's heavyweight. We've seen this before, but it also, I think it's disingenuous when people talk about fighters like Overeem and Arlovsky, like there's no problem with them being knocked out or hurt. You know what I mean? Like it's heavyweight. In all likelihood, they probably just have normal people's chins, but that in and of itself is a weakness in this division. That would be like saying that, I don't know, someone at featherweight is actually a pretty good athlete. Well, you can't just be a pretty good athlete in that division, because that is that division's stock and trade, is athleticism, scrambling ability, and speed. And so you need to be at the elite of that division, you need to be up there. And durability is like that for heavyweight. Alistair Overeem is not durable, not at all. I do think that in recent years he has started to overcome the mental issues that go along with that lack of durability, which is one of the main reasons I like him in this fight. Because the problem with Overeem was not always that he was fragile-chinned. Of course, that was a problem, and it still is a problem. But it was that he didn't seem to have confidence in his chin either. Nor did he seem to have confidence in himself in general. We've seen a lot of fights in Overeem's career, over the course of his career, in which he takes a clean shot or starts to tire out and just kind of crumbles. The whole game plan seems to go out the window. He starts turning his back. He starts becoming cautious or timorous. Everything changes for him. And I haven't seen that in some time. Even in some of his recent losses, I guess his most recent loss to Ben Rothwell, he looked to be doing fine. He was doing a lot of what he's doing now and got caught. And that's still going to happen if you're fragile. But he has been stung in his fights with Roy Nelson. He ate some good shots from Andrei Arlovsky, and he got backed up a few times by Junior Dos Santos, has not wilted, has not drastically changed his tack under those kinds of circumstances. He has instead remained disciplined. And a disciplined Alistair Overeem, I think, is a very, very dangerous fighter for someone who is still as relatively untested against elite heavyweights as Stipe Miocic.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I mean, I think at the most basic level, Overeem is one of those fighters who needs to feel like he's in control. And in the past, the way that he felt like he was in control was by marching his opponent down, by through forward movement, by constantly operating off the front foot. And I remember, even as far back as 2011, I remember the very first fight I ever tried to break down with film was Werdum Overeem 2. And it was clear to me even then, with a pretty untrained eye for looking at film, that Overeem did not like being backed up, did not like having guys coming after him. And so that was a product of the same kind of mental fragility that caused him to crumble in those fights. Now, I think the great genius of what Greg Jackson and the coaches at Jackson Wink have done with him since he moved there is to prove to him that moving in space, that not being the guy who's moving forward, does not mean that you're losing the fight.
Right.
And I think that in fact, like, if you're doing that, you're the one who's in control. So they flipped a mental switch with him that says, okay, you can be, if you're doing this, you're winning. So just keep doing that, and you're going to win. And like, that's a pretty huge kind of change. And I think it speaks to what great coaches those guys are.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in his heart, Alistair Overeem is probably still a bit of a bully. Like, his personality has never changed over the years. Someone asked me on Twitter why, because I guess sometime a while ago I mentioned that the smugness of Makwan Amirkhani kind of bugged me. And I don't really feel like he bugs me all that much, but he certainly is smug, and I don't doubt that I said that at some point. But they said that I like Alistair Overeem, and why? And I don't really know. Alistair Overeem is smug. Maybe it's that I feel like he's earned his smugness because he's been doing it for such a damn long time. But the guy has a sort of a bully's demeanor about him. Like, he does think he's better than his opponents. I think the brilliance is that he's using a different kind of bullying now. Like, instead of being that little kid who do you remember that video of that little kid who was like hitting the big chubby kid in the stomach and then got slammed on his head?
Mm-hmm.
So that used to be Alistair Overeem. Of course, he wasn't that diminutive, but his chin made it so that the fight could be turned around at any moment and that his confidence was tied to that. And so being that kind of bully where you're pushing the other guy around, that leaves you open to your faults if your fault happens to be fragility. Now he's like the bully who like rides by and throws a urine-filled water balloon in your face in his car, and then he's gone. You know what I mean? Like, he's still bullying you. He's still trying to make you feel stupid. He's still trying to assert his dominance. But now you can't really do anything about it. It's a lot harder to retaliate. You better get his plate number and call the police department to track him down. It's much more difficult now. So I agree with you fully. I think this change in strategy is wonderfully calculated to protect Overeem's chin and protect his confidence. And unlike his teammate, Andrei Arlovski, who's gone through a somewhat similar transformation, Overeem has a much broader array of tools to use from that approach. Like, Andrei Arlovski is still pretty much a right hand, and very little else. He's fast and he's powerful, but that makes him a little more predictable, and being more predictable makes you easier to counter. Alistair Overeem is possibly more creative with his striking arsenal now than he ever has been. He has his kicks, he has his knees, he has his punches. He likes to throw weird stuff, and he's comfortable doing it because when he's far away, when he's making you chase him, he now feels like he is in control of the fight.
It's impossible to overstate what a broad depth or what a breadth and depth of skill Overeem has at his disposal at this point.
Yeah.
Like, this is not the outfighting game of like a dude who was just taught to strike a little while ago. This is the outfighting game of somebody who knows how to throw 1-2 low kick. Like, who knows the footwork, who understands the spacing, who understands, most importantly, I think, the timing. He still has absolutely outstanding timing, and that's what he has to have to make this work. It's just now he's taking all of these skill sets that he's learned over the past 17 years, and Overeem has worked with some of the very best striking coaches on the planet. Like, he's worked with the team at Golden Glory. He's worked with Henry Hooft. He's now worked with Mike Winklejohn and all the guys at Jackson Wink. Like, he is an outstanding. He worked with Roberto Flamingo, who's a really good striking coach for a long time. Like, Overeem has all of those skills. He's just now applying them in one particular way that happens to suit his personality and the stage of his career where he's at right now.
Yeah.
Because he's still a prodigious athlete. Like,
yeah.
He's still one of the fastest guys in this division. He's still one of the hardest hitting guys in this division. And when you put those physical tools together with the particular approach that he has right now, it masks his deficiencies while maximizing the positive aspects of his game.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking depth of skill, one of the other reasons I like Overeem in this fight is that this is also not like, it's not a striker versus a wrestle boxer. People have often had this misconception about Overeem because he was a K1 Grand Prix champion. He's known as this striker. He's a knockout artist and all of that. So he's known as this devastating striker. But the guy is an MMA native. He has been doing submission grappling and mixed martial arts for a very long time. I want to say his first grappling exhibition was like when he was 14 or something like that. He has been doing it for a long time. And he is absolutely comfortable on the ground, comfortable defending takedowns, comfortable executing takedowns, and he's got a little bit of a submission game to make you worry about his taking him down as well. Alistair Overeem has a very solid guillotine. We haven't seen it in a long time, but that's also, I think, because in most of his recent fights, Overeem's either been like knocked out on the feet or has been too far away for people to easily initiate takedowns. But if you threaten those things, he has answers. He has a very deep skill set with which to respond to those kinds of issues. You know, he grappled on the ground with Fabricio Werdum for a few extended periods, didn't have any serious problems. He who else has he grappled with recently?
He submitted Vitor Belfort years ago. He's honestly, I think that if you had to pick the best single skill set that Overeem possesses, it's not his striking, it's probably his top game.
Yeah, well, he destroyed Frank Mir from top position.
Yeah, he keeps a tremendous base. He's really long. He's got great posture, especially in the guard. He's striking from inside the guard is quickly becoming a lost art in MMA, and Overeem is still a master of it, which matters in the heavyweight division because there's a far higher percentage of guys who, rather than trying to scramble back to their feet, will try and lock you up and either work from their back or force a stand up from there.
Yeah.
And so Overeem's ability to not just control you, but to do serious damage from that position it matters a lot in the context of the division where he's fighting.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's talk about Stipe Miocic then, because most of this is, I feel, bolstering my notion that Alistair Overeem is going to win. We have this variety from range. We have this ability to maintain confidence in the face of an aggressive opponent. Do you think that Miocic's advantages are really just tactical? Do you think it's that he is just going to be able to catch Overeem at some point, or is there more of like a broader strategic picture that you think Miocic's skills fit into?
I think he's a little underrated with his pressure.
Sure.
I would say I think that he's not a bad pressure fighter. I think if he can back Overeem up to the fence, he can get some work done in that scenario. But I think the big thing to me is that tactical issue of the counter. But then more broadly speaking, also he's a durable dude. I think that he can take Overeem's shots, and we have not seen from Overeem since he started playing this new game is whether he can do it with somebody who wants to push a pace with him for more than about 12 minutes.
True. That's true.
Like Roy Nelson was just done by the third round of their fight. So like, who else has he fought? Who else did he go the distance with? Anybody else in this streak, or were the others knockouts? The others were knockouts.
The
right?
Frank Mir fight went the distance, and I would say that was probably one of the earlier. That was right after the Travis Browne fight, so that was kind of Overeem trying this new angle, because he was doing the same stuff he does now against Rothwell and got clipped.
I think that was his last fight with the Black Zillions.
Okay.
So I think in 5 fights since going to Jackson Wink, I'm looking at his record now. The Nelson fight is the only one that's gone the distance, and Nelson was done by with like 7 minutes left to go in the fight. So that's not going to happen with Miocic unless Overeem knocks out Miocic early. He's going to have to deal with a guy who can stay with him for all 5 rounds, who's going to keep working, who's going to keep pressuring, who's going to still be there in the pocket to land the counter shot. And my big thing with this is just that if you give Miocic enough opportunities, eventually he is going to plant one on him, because everybody else, despite Overeem's improvements with his ability to get inside safely, the feints and the angles are a huge part of that. You don't exactly know what's coming next, so he benefits from that variety in that sense. Every opponent in that stretch, except for Stefan Struve, has caught him at least once coming in.
Sure.
So, and Miocic is more durable than any of those guys, except for maybe Dos Santos. So, if he can kind of weather that storm, if he can land to the body, if he can stay there, if he can land some low kicks, if he can throw some effective kicks at range, and not get blown out of the water early, I think that by the 3rd or the 4th round, things are going to swing back in Miocic's direction, and at that point, I think he lands the shot.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I'm wondering how durable Miocic is. I know he can take a punishment. I don't think he's quite like Roy Nelson levels of durability, though.
Oh no, God no, huh?
I mean, it is anyone, but. That is, again, the only guy that Alistair Overeem has failed to knock out in this recent stretch. That's a bit of MMA math, just saying that, he knocked everyone else. But we've got guys like Junior Dos Santos. We've got guys like Brock Lesnar, pretty famously tough, although it was a body shot that hurt him. Alistair Overeem, he is a powerful striker. And I think it's the variety that prevents those counter punches from being a real difficult thing for Alistair Overeem to deal with. Getting hit while coming in with a punch is one thing. But I, for one, was a little baffled that Fabricio Werdum went with such a boxing-heavy attack against Stipe Miocic in their fight.
I don't think he did. I think he was throwing a lot of kicks. He threw a lot of low kicks. He was using a lot of front kicks to reset the distance. He would throw a boxing combination, and then he would come with a front kick. He did that like 4 or 5 times.
A lot of naked kicks, though.
Yeah, but I think he's okay with that.
Sure, but it ended up being, I think maybe what I saw in that fight is that he kind of felt that he couldn't just easily kick Stipe Miocic. I think Alistair Overeem is going to be more committed to a diverse kicking attack from distance. We have seen a lot of his strikes these days come from body kicks from that southpaw stance. That has been a thing he's used a lot against recent opponents, to kind of just to as a relatively safe strike from range. He's not worried about being taken down, and he throws it far enough away that he can plant it right in your liver or your solar plexus and not get caught clean with a punch. I see Alistair Overeem coming into this fight and landing strikes like that. And then there's still the issue. There's durability, but Stipe Miocic is still very hittable. I have a lot of respect for Joe Delgado, and I can't remember the name of the new guy that Miocic is working with. He's got a new boxing coach now as well. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Guy's name is... No, can't find it. So I'll look for it. But he's got a new boxing coach. But the style that he's using now is generally the same as what he was using before. I think that guys like Delgado are very good. I don't say guys like Delgado. I think Joe, his original boxing trainer, has a good eye for like big picture boxing, who knows how to approach different styles, knows the general ideas of fighting a southpaw or of forcing a fighter into the corner, knows that volume wins rounds. A lot of the big picture stuff that Mark Henry talked about teaching his fighters. But Mark Henry supplements that with a really in-depth level of technical coaching as well. There's a lot of little nuances that Mark Henry has his fighters use to supplement that general sort of round-winning, fight-winning mentality. And if I'm thinking of guys that Joe Delgado has worked with, I'm thinking Stipe Miocic, I'm thinking Jessica I, not a guy, but Jessica I, and Cody Garbrandt. And all of them are lacking a lot of those little details, little subtle pieces of defense, little areas of footwork, technique. They're good at knowing that they throw on the break, they throw volume, they counter to take certain weapons away. But when it comes to making little adjustments and defending themselves when it really matters, a lot of times there are some holes there. And I kind of worry that Stipe Miocic is going to get clipped by Alistair Overeem, because we've seen him take shots, but we've seen him survive shots, but that means, Pat, that we've seen him take shots. He took a lot of punches from Junior Dos Santos, and took quite a few from Mark Hunt, even as Mark Hunt was gassed later in that fight. He was knocked out, of course, by Stefan Struve way earlier in his UFC career. And it takes, I think, a really predictable opponent or a really reckless opponent for Miocic to really shine. He has his moments against guys like Dos Santos, against guys like Hunt, but it takes like a really sloppy approach, like from Roy Nelson or from Fabricio Werdum, for him to look stellar. You know what I mean?
I'll counterpoint that just a little bit, and say that I think in the context of this particular matchup, that's not like, while I agree with you that his defense is by no means stellar, and yes, we have seen him get hit, I think Overeem's tendencies actually play into Miocic's hands here. I think Stipe's pace is both his greatest ally, but it's also his greatest problem defensively, because he repeatedly puts himself in ranges where he can be hit.
Yeah.
It's not that he gets hit with an exceptionally high percentage of shots. It's that because he wants to push the pace, because he wants to spam 1-2s at you, because he likes to counter from the pocket, he consistently puts himself in position to take those shots. Yeah. Overeem is not going to let him get into position to take as many shots as he normally would in a fight. Like, that sounds strange, but I think that Miocic, that he's not going to allow Miocic into a firefight.
But what does that mean? So what do you think that means for Miocic coming forward, if he basically then will he feel compelled then to chase Overeem? Because Overeem probably has the best movement and footwork of anyone that Miocic has tried to pressure. And if he does that not make him more open for really decisive shots? Or do you think that just because he's not constantly at that preferred range, he's less vulnerable?
I think you could read it both ways.
Yeah.
I think that it makes him more vulnerable to the big single shot. But what we haven't seen from Overeem in this particular iteration, I think, is much of a counterpunching game.
Sure. Yeah. It's mostly like defend, get away, and feint and lead with something weird.
Yeah, so I think that if Miocic can effectively pressure, he should be relatively safe. It's when he's out in open space. I think he has to try and counter within the context of a pressuring game. If he just tries to sit in open space and let Overeem come to him, then I think you're right. I think he's going to get chewed up, and I think he eventually eats the big shot that puts him down. But if he can pressure in bursts, I think he can make Overeem remember the kind of stuff that Overeem doesn't want to remember about himself deep down in his soul.
Yeah.
And that is going to open up the opportunities for him to land the kind of shot that he wants.
And that Miocic is still probably durable enough to make up for any mistakes that might, any holes that might happen in that game plan.
Yeah, I remain unconvinced that Alistair Overeem can do this for more than about 11 minutes.
All right, larger margin for error is really the thing here. All right, well, I see where you're coming from. I'm still going to ride with Overeem, but that's just because it's more fun if we disagree, Pat. And I think that about does it. Do you have a specific prediction? What do you think happens? Like, how long do you think the fight goes?
I think Miocic by right hand counter knockout in the late third or early fourth round.
All right, I'm going to go with Overeem by second round TKO.
I like it. Yeah. I like it. See, this is a good disagreement that we had right here.
And no matter what happens, it'll be a good fight. Like, it's a genuinely good heavyweight fight is a rare thing. But Alistair Overeem and Stipe Miocic, they got track records of taking part in just that kind of fight. Both
Jordan Breen was talking about this a little while ago, where he mentioned that the meme of the bad heavyweight fight. And I don't think that in like bad heavyweight cardio and stuff like that, I don't think that he's wrong about that. I think that we don't give elite heavyweights enough credit for having good cardio and having well-rounded skill sets and putting on really good like 5-round fights.
The problem is that we don't have that many elite heavyweights.
Yeah, that's the fair counterpoint.
Like even a half of what we would because of numbers be forced to call elite heavyweights don't possess those qualities. But the ones who are really top of the line, I mean, it's that you start to realize why heavyweight is such an enduringly popular division. The consequences are huge, and fights tend to be very dramatic. And Miocic and Overeem, I'm really looking forward to it. So disagreement only spices things up further. With that being said, why don't we take a quick break, Pat? When we come back, we're going to get to some of the other fights on this card, as mentioned before: Werdum, Browne, Faber, Rivera, and Urijah Calderwood. Lots of good stuff. We'll get to it after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back. Let's go ahead and jump in with our second heavyweight fight of the evening, Fabricio Werdum versus Travis Browne. Pat, you begged me to talk about this fight. You insisted we talk about this fight, even though it's a rematch that we think was fairly decisive. What do you think is so interesting about this fight that you would make me talk about it on this show?
Well, so I just think that Werdum and Browne are such polar opposites in particular ways with their games. I think that Browne is a pretty smart tactical fighter. Like, he generally has the right counter. He generally has the right shot picked out to match what his opponent is going to try to do. But he's also a terrible strategic fighter. Like, I don't think he really understands why you throw volume or how you modulate your pace, or how one thing that you do in the fight leads logically into the next thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I just don't think he really has that in him. Conversely, Fabricio Werdum, while being a smart tactical fighter, is also a smart strategic fighter. Yeah. Like, he understands how things that he does early in the fight are going to play into things that he does in the middle of the fight and then at the end of the fight. Like, I don't know that there haven't been many heavyweights who understand how to use 5 rounds to their advantage better than Fabricio Werdum. Even though he didn't need 5 rounds against Cain Velasquez or Mark Hunt, I think he understands really well how to use that to his advantage. So I think that contrast makes this really interesting.
Except for his last fight.
Well, yeah, except for his last fight.
Something weird happened.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
difficult to really get at why that fight went down the way it did, but that's a matter for another day.
It was just a couple of, and I think we talked about it at length, how inexplicable it was that Werdum did what he did.
I laughed, man. I had to laugh. That was the only reaction. I watched it happen. I was like, what the fuck are you doing? I was just like, what happened?
It was so bizarre. It was so strange.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
leaving that aside, Generally speaking, Werdum has been an extremely smart fighter.
Yeah.
I think the first Travis Browne fight was where we saw exactly how smart Werdum is with the things
Travis
that he
Browne
does.
was favored in that fight, if I recall correctly.
Almost 2-1.
Yeah.
Almost two to
And that
one.
was like Werdum 2.0's coming out party. Because Travis Browne had been knocking out, like Josh Burnett, he knocked out Overeem. He had all these like weird performances, 2 weird elbow knockouts, and then a comeback against Overeem where he showed how tough he was. And Werdum had only outstruck guys like, Roy Nelson
And Mike Russo.
Mike Russo, yeah. And then outgrappled Big Nog, which is great. But again, like it was an old Big Nog. So we come into this fight. I think I picked Werdum, but the feeling still was that Browne was really dangerous, and that he was at the top of his game. And it ended up being, aside from the first round, a totally one-sided fight for Werdum.
There was a distinct turning point in this fight, and it was with about a minute and a half or 2 minutes left in the first round, where Werdum lands a hard body kick to Browne, and Browne kind of pats his rib cage like "bring it," and then Werdum lands just a brutal left hook to the body, and after that, Browne tries to come back, and Werdum lands a 3-punch combination, and then Browne is just done. That's it. The mental momentum of the fight shifted, and I think that particular moment sums up something really interesting about both guys' games, which is that Travis Browne is a bully who needs to feel like he has the high ground in any fight that he's in, like Overeem, which is what made Browne's comeback against Overeem so kind of strange and not a thing that I think we'll ever really see from him as a consistent thing.
It wasn't consistent. I mean, that fight very well could have been stopped.
Yeah.
He was shelled up. He was done. Really what happened is he was doing just enough to protect himself, not fighting back, and Overeem got tired of hitting him.
Yeah, basically. But you can't bully Werdum because he just doesn't give a fuck. Like, he is a shit-eating wild man. You can't get inside his head. You can't intimidate him. Like, he's a crazy person by any reasonable metric.
Why do you say that? Explain that.
He's a dude, he's gotten mean from years of training.
I don't want you to like slam Werdum, but I know that you trained in his gym for some time. You've had some personal experiences with him.
Yeah, I mean, he's just not wired like normal people are.
Yeah.
Like, I don't exactly know how else to put it, but most fighters will talk about we'll talk about fear, right? That's a thing that they'll bring up from time to time. I was scared. Like, I would say probably 2/3 of fighters will mention fear. Werdum, it's not like he's like shit talking or like trying to minimize the effects of fear. He just doesn't feel it. I don't think. I genuinely don't think he's wired to feel that way when he's going into a fight. And like one of my friends, we were just kind of messing around before an open mat, and Fabricio was there, and we were just shooting the shit with him. My friends asked him, like, "Do you get scared before a big fight?" And the look on Verdum's face said that he fundamentally didn't understand the question.
Yeah, he was like, "What do you mean? what is? Why would you get scared before a fight?"
Yeah, and so but that against somebody like Travis Browne, who relies far more than any technical trick, who relies on your fear of being hit by him to dictate how the fight goes, that's a tremendous advantage for Werdum.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that Browne can't knock him out. I mean, Werdum can be touched. He's not unhittable. Like, for all his craft, he's not a good defensive fighter. But if the fight goes longer than a couple of minutes, we know where the mental advantage lies. And we saw that play out really clearly the first time.
And I want to touch back on something you mentioned about the turning point in that fight is something that has... It's both an aspect of Werdum's meanness, his killer instinct, and we talked in the past about how that's kind of been trained into him, or at least you thought so, having seen the way Cordero works with guys in the gym, but also his craft and his experience. Being such an experienced guy in MMA and in jiu-jitsu, he seemed to know in that fight when to make the turning point happen. It wasn't like Browne versus Overeem, where the turning point happened because Overeem got tired and Browne basically slowly worked his way back into the fight. It was like, I mean, in that fight, the turning point for Browne was gradual, and it was because Overeem stopped pressing, and he basically was given to him that he had an opportunity to change the fight around. Werdum had Travis Browne in front of him. He was not yet tired, and he took a moment where he kind of chose to mentally test Travis Browne. He quite literally gut checked him with that left hook to the body that you talked about. He basically like put him on the spot, because that was a moment where Travis Browne was kind of taunting. He had knocked Werdum down, and that is where, he still felt like he had a chance in this fight. And Werdum shows the specific moment when Browne was showing off that he was still around, that he wasn't hurt, to punish him more brutally than he had at any other point in that round. And I think that's the thing, is that the meanness is not just like, I like hurting people or whatever. It's knowing when to bully someone, knowing when somebody is about to mentally crack, and when to turn that into physical fatigue. And I really think Werdum does have that. I think he knows that he can take somebody, he can mock them, he can tease them, and when he sees them start to flag, or when he sees them try to prove both to him and to themselves that they're still in the fight, that is when he can choose to turn it up and really prove that no, they're really not. And that's a different kind of strategic thinking. It's not just tactical. It's, why am I going to hit you now? Well, it's because it's going to win me the rest of the fight in this moment if I can convince you that you're losing.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely all of that. And like, I mean, I could share a lot of different Fabricio stories from the years that I spent around him, but like, he really genuinely thinks in those terms. Like, it's hard to overstate how crafty he is with the way. I mean, with the way that he approaches fighting. Like, there's always a reason why he wants you to do something. Mm-hmm. If he's teaching, like, yeah. there's always a step or 2 or 3 steps ahead. Like, it's not just that you're going to throw a low kick. Here's why you throw a low kick at this particular point in the round to elicit this particular response, and here's how that's going to pay off for you a couple rounds later. Like, he's always thinking in those terms, and it comes through most clearly with his grappling, but he's got the same kind of mentality for his strikes as well. Yeah. So it's just a notable kind of thing. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win, but it's why I favor him.
And there remains the possibility that he has finally hit that decline. And that maybe his durability or his physical conditioning is not going to be as good as it once was. Big knockouts can often be big turning points. But if Fabricio Werdum is anything like he was the first time, I don't really see any reason to believe that the result will be any different. Yeah?
Yeah, agreed.
We agree. Bantamweight fight. Urijah Faber, Jimmie Rivera. How long, Pat, have we been waiting for the other thonged sandal to drop with the career of Urijah Faber?
We've been waiting for a long time. We've been talking about the potential for a drop-off from him since some of the very first shows that we did together.
Yeah, and it hasn't happened. And I want to take this opportunity, actually, to say that Urijah Faber really is a pretty amazing fighter. I usually talk about how his game isn't that great, or about how I'm expecting him at some point to have this big collapse, or about how he doesn't match up with the elite in the division. His last 3 losses are Renan Barão and Dominic Cruz, and what was the other one? Frankie Edgar. And so that basically right there, that's like, these are most of the best guys around your weight. You can't beat them. The fights weren't competitive. I have no doubt that a fight with TJ Dillashaw would be as uncompetitive as the Dominic Cruz one was. Maybe Faber would land a little more, but he'd probably get knocked out too. But all of that really takes away from the fact that Urijah Faber's 37 years old. He's been fighting for, I think, 12 or 14 years. He's clocked 44 fights. More than that,
42 fights.
42. Oh, I'm sorry, my math is off. 42 fights, mostly against the best in the world. He's been regarded as the best at his weight, among the best at his weight for a decade now. And he is still there. He is still manning the gates. He's still keeping fighters at the level of Jimmie Rivera, or as far as rankings go, from passing into the elite. Guys like Frankie Saenz, guys like Francisco Rivera, guys like Michael McDonald, those guys can't get through Urijah Faber. And most of those fights are pretty emphatic from Faber as well, or at least he tends to find a finish or find some way to put his stamp on the action. And so I do want to give a little bit of appreciation to Urijah Faber. There are a lot of reasons to dislike him, but as a fighter, you got to respect the fact that he is still so competitive at this level. All of that being said, Pat, I think the other shoe's about to drop. I think Jimmie Rivera is the guy to beat him.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. Absolutely all of it. So crazy statistic. In his decade, literal decade of fighting under the Zuffa banner, Urijah Faber has never lost to somebody who did not hold the championship at some point. He's lost to Mike Thomas Browne, Jose Aldo, Renan Barão, Dominic Cruz, and Frankie Edgar. And that's all of those guys have held titles.
Yeah,
And
and while that
only losses.
that definitively says that Faber doesn't quite and hasn't for some time belonged among those guys, isn't at their level, and a lot of those fights have not been competitive. He have been fairly one-sided losses. It does also say that you have to be at that level to be better than Urijah Faber. He's just below that, and he's just below that for a longer time than most of those guys have been at the level above him.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. He has been an elite fighter almost from the time that he started fighting.
Yeah.
And so he's got incredible longevity. He takes good care of himself. He trains smart. He's got, like, the irony of what we've said about alpha male is that is kind of a camp built around Urijah Faber and the way that Faber likes to operate. He's a smart fighter who knows how to use the kind of training that they do there to best benefit him.
It's the kind of training he likes, and then maybe he doesn't see why it doesn't work for everyone else.
Yeah, because Faber is the kind of guy who's going to do all of his homework himself and is going to figure out how all of that stuff works on his own. He doesn't need a team to do that for him.
I don't necessarily know how good all of his conclusions always are.
Yeah, agreed.
I think I recall that his game plan against Dominic Cruz was to counterpunch. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. That was what he wanted to do to Dominic
Cruz. Because it
Cruz.
kind of worked for him in their fight in 2011,
Sure.
and he didn't really see how that would not work for him maybe a second time.
Yeah.
So I sent you a note the other day, Connor, because I had seen a Snapchat video of Urijah Faber's where he was watching tape of Jimmie Rivera, but it was tape of Jimmie Rivera from his fight with Dennis Bermudez to get into the Ultimate Fighter house in 2011.
Yeah.
So my question is, has Urijah Faber watched everything else of Jimmie Rivera's? Or did he fire up the old Fight Pass, type in Jimmie Rivera's name, see that fight, and start watching it?
And if he has watched all of it, is he still putting a lot of weight on what he saw in those very old fights?
Yeah.
You
My
can't put
hunch is
equal
that
weight
he
on
probably fired up the old Fight Pass, typed in Jimmie Rivera's name, saw that fight come up, and thought, oh, I'm going to watch some tape on Jimmie Rivera.
Fight Pass search is broken right now. If it weren't, I would love to search, and I would love to discover that was the first result.
I will literally bet you that it's one of the higher up results.
Yeah.
So, but I think that tells us a lot about Urijah Faber, that you can read that both ways, that those are both options, and they're both perfectly plausible options. Sure. I think tells us a lot about
He's
Faber.
researching his opponent. He is thinking very carefully about how to beat him, but that may be his conclusions because he doesn't have this. I don't think Urijah Faber, and you can see in the way he runs his camp, has a real deep understanding himself of how, like, everything except wrestling and submission grappling technique works. Like footwork and striking and feinting and all of that, whether it's boxing or kickboxing, I think we've seen from him time and time again that he doesn't really understand that. And then from a strategic perspective, doesn't really know how to press the advantages that he does have. Now, Faber is an insanely gifted athlete. Like you said, his longevity is in part because he's taken really good care of himself. He's still in probably close to as good a shape as he was way back in the day nowadays. As close as you could be having aged 10 years. And that is still a big advantage. But against guys who are really good enough to not just be beaten by physical advantages, I think you really start to see the problems with Faber's approach. We've talked in the past about his sort of incessant stance switching, because I think Faber has this idea that it makes him more unpredictable if, like, he switches from throwing overhand rights to throwing overhand lefts from southpaw. And he seems to want to give the other guy different looks and do things that are confusing to him. But if the other guy doesn't have any immediate threat that your look is giving him, or if he's not, like, desperate to hit you and you're making him miss and embarrassing him, just showing him something different in your stance is not always going to be that effective. And we've seen that. And while I was hopeful that was going away, that tendency, since Duane Ludwig left Team Alpha Male, it kind of seems to have come back. We saw a lot of that against Dominic Cruz, a lot of the weird stance switching. And Cruz was a perfect counterpoint to that because Cruz knew exactly how to take advantage of what Faber thought he was making Cruz do with those stance switches.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Faber plays an idiosyncratic game, and kind of the irony of the game that Faber wants to play is he plays like an MMA native, where there's a huge emphasis on transitions, despite the fact that Faber was a wrestler to start with. Like,
all of Faber's game at this point is dependent upon transitions, upon creating transitions, using his strikes to get into his wrestling, using his wrestling to get into scrambles where he can find a submission, or alternatively finding a way to get on top where he can kind of bomb away. Again, the lost art of striking from inside the guard. Faber is a master of that.
Absolutely.
So if he can get into transitions, Faber is dangerous. And we saw that in the first round of his last fight with Dominic Cruz, that the best strike of that round was a left hand that Faber landed as he had a hold of Cruz's leg and Cruz was kind of trying to scramble against the fence. He landed just a brutal left hand right on Cruz's chin. So if he can force transitions, even if he doesn't find the submission, Faber can land big shots there. He's always looking to sneak things in. It's a really kind of an MMA native kind of game. The problem is when Faber is forced to fight in any single phase, except for maybe straight grappling for an extended period of time, he starts to struggle.
He's like a much, much better Sage Northcutt.
Yeah, with a lot more depth of skill. And like, it's kind of a facetious comparison, but it's kind of not. Where like the real strength of Faber's game at this point in his career is the sinew that binds the different phases together.
Yeah.
And I think probably the clinch too. I think he's also he can do just fine for extended periods in the clinch.
Yeah.
So, but if he can't do that, if you force him to just strike or if you force him to just wrestle, if you can shut those transitions between phases down, then he's going to struggle. And I think that's exactly what Rivera is going to do to him. Rivera isn't going to be bullied by him in the clinch. At range, Rivera can exploit the fact that Faber doesn't throw much volume. Rivera is a really good combination puncher, really committed to throwing a lot of volume. And I think that at range, he can just kind of outland Faber about 3-2 and win rounds. And that's kind of the nature of the matchup. Stuff takedowns. Rivera has yet to be taken down in the UFC. And I can't actually remember him getting taken down on the regionals either.
Yeah.
So
I think he's a strong enough wrestler, strong enough clinch fighter to at least compete with Faber, which is all he really needs to do because he's got a pretty large advantage in range striking. I really like the way that Rivera strikes. I like that he enters the pocket with his feet first. I like that he stays extremely active with his feints when he can't draw something out by feinting you and making you lead, because as a shorter fighter, he likes to make you give up your own reach advantage and counter. And when he can't make that happen, then he'll move back and do the Machida thing. He'll pot shot you, take a lot of angles, and make you chase him. And as soon as you commit to a single step coming forward, he's going to step right back in and collapse the distance and hit you. There's a lot of different ways that he can strike with somebody, a lot of depth and really solid technique. And the only thing that worries me here is that he did get knocked down once or twice in his fight with Yuri Alcantara. I don't think he was really hurt at any point, more caught off balance. But again, that's Alcantara, very powerful, much bigger, and a southpaw, a real natural southpaw. I don't think Faber has any of those advantages. I think he's a little more predictable, doesn't have the same length advantage, so he's going to be in range more often to be hit by Rivera. And in that scenario, I think Rivera is going to outpoint him. I don't think he's going to knock Faber out. I don't know if Faber... I mean, he got knocked out by Mike Browne, but otherwise he's pretty damn durable. We did see 2 knockdowns in the Cruz fight, so again, more evidence that reckoning is coming, but I have sort of sworn off just expecting a massive collapse from Urijah Faber because it just hasn't happened. I think it's going to continue to be a sort of slow, almost unnoticeable at points decline like we've seen for the past several years, and I think it's going to be enough for Rivera to get up fairly close, but a pretty clear decision. Last up on the main card, women's strawweight fight, Jessica Andrade versus Joanne Calderwood. I'm super excited about this fight. Faber Rivera might be my favorite fight in the card in terms of relevance, but mostly because I'm really excited about Jimmie Rivera as a contender. This one, you said before, Pat, and I have to agree, probably most likely to be fight of the night material.
Oh, the pace in this fight is going to be totally freaking insane.
Yeah.
Like both Andrade and Calderwood just go out there and throw and throw and throw and throw and throw.
Yeah.
It's also a really fascinating matchup because of the different ranges that they like to operate at, the different options they have available to them, and the fact that Andrade comes out firing right out of the gate and Calderwood is kind of a slow starter. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of variables for us to bear in mind in this fight, but all of which contribute to making it an even better fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think there are 2 ways that this fight can go, and I think both of them will happen. I think that, as you said, Calderwood being the slow starter and Andrade being a fast starter who likes to throw a lot of volume, I think one way is that Andrade could overwhelm Calderwood early, land some big shots, and at least come close to stopping her. And it's not at all unlikely that she does stop Calderwood. She's durable, but she's hittable. She recovers well, but she's hittable. She's been hurt early in a lot of fights recently. Calderwood was stunned by Marina Moroz before being armbarred. She was stunned by Courtney Casey, and she even had some significant trouble with Sohee Ham before recovering and taking over that fight. And again, that was against a very small Sohee Ham, especially for Calderwood, who's a big strawweight, a long, tall strawweight. So Calderwood gets hit early. She's a little susceptible to pressure. She's kind of got in style and in slow startingness, she's got a Donald Cerrone thing going on. And so that's a weakness. But like Donald Cerrone, I think Calderwood's also going through a little bit of a renaissance. Watching her fight with Valerie Letourneau, it wasn't super dramatic. Things weren't hugely different. But Calderwood showed, especially as the fight progressed and she warmed up to the action, a little more nuance to what she was doing at range. A few more angles off of punches. A lot of throwing the left kick at her as a teep or as an inside leg kick, and then stepping off to the side with a jab and pulling her head back out of range as she did so. A lot of little slips with the right hand to counter the right hand of Letourneau, and a lot of lateral movement at range, a few more feints. Things were a little more subtle, a little more thought out from Joanne Calderwood. I have to give some credit to a friend of the show, a listener, and a buddy of mine who I hope to see at UFC 203, Dean Riley, who of the Dinky Ninjas team, who works with Calderwood a little bit. He has done some training. I've seen some training footage that he did with her. She spreads her time between Dinky Ninja and TriStar, and I won't say like that Dean Riley is responsible for Joanne Calderwood making those changes, but she was definitely working on a lot of the things we saw that were different in the Letourneau fight in her pad sessions with Dean. So whatever's going on there, I think it's paying off. Working with Faraz Zahabi and the crew at TriStar can only help to enhance those things. And so I've gotten off track here, but the other thing that can happen is that Joanne Calderwood warms to the fight, uses the clinch and probably the takedown game as well to nullify Andrade's pressure and counters her later in the fight. And I think both of those things are going to happen. And my fear is that Andrade is going to get the knockout early, but my head says that she probably won't, and that Calderwood will win a really thrilling comeback victory, possibly by submission if she can get Andrade to the ground in round 3.
That's a really good summation of this fight. Like, the question is, at what point does that turning point happen? Does that happen halfway through the second round? Does it happen at the end of the second round? Does it happen at the end of the first? And so that's what is going to dictate your pick in this fight. Do you think that Calderwood can win rounds? Do you think that she can? Do you think that she can win 2 rounds, or do you think that she has it in her to finish late? I think she can finish late, and so that I think is why I'm going to pick her. But it is a really, really close fight, and it would not at all surprise me if Andrade just walked her down early and just beat 7 shades of shit out of her.
Yeah, and to make that change happen again, it's got to be like I said with Fabricio Werdum. Calderwood has to make it happen. She has to seize her opportunities and punish Andrade early in the fight. She has to come out there prepared to grab her head and pull her into some knees, to tie her arms up, to look for outside trips. She has to make those things happen. If she waits for Andrade to slow down, it's probably not going to happen, especially if Andrade is having early success. We don't know for certain that her stamina is really good at strawweight. And of course, her fight with her debut in this division against Jessica Andrade was really one-sided, so she didn't have any of the confidence issues that can sometimes affect stamina for front-runner type fighters. But she did throw 205 punches in less than 2 full rounds. She still seems capable of throwing a lot of volume, and she throws nothing but power shots. She doesn't feint. She doesn't jab. She doesn't move a lot. She kind of stands there, waits for you to throw, and then swarms the hell out of you with.
She's John Lineker. She's the female John Lineker in literally every way, except she has maybe a better clinch game than Lineker does, and Lineker has a better takedown game. But
in broad outline, their games are exactly the same. They're not really pressure fighters, but they do their best work swarming you against the fence. They basically, what defines them is that they're punchers who always have their shots ready to go. And when they throw, they don't just throw one shot, they throw multiple shots.
Always combinations and always head body. So that attack is always, if you're just going to shell up and back up to the fence, you're going to get hit by something. And each thing you get hit by is going to make you more likely to get hit by the next one because they're fairly well put together. So, yeah, it's a tough fight.
If Calderwood can collapse the pocket with the clinch, it depends. She will do that at some point in this fight. Whether she does it in the first round or whether she does it in the second round, I think kind of dictates whether she's going to win or not.
Yeah, I think you're right. She's got to do that before the first round elapses. She's got to find a way to slow that roll, or because if she comes into the second round still trying to figure it out, then there's a really good chance she loses that round. I don't think that change is going to happen immediately unless that turning point is going to occur in an instant, unless she can take Andrade down and work her on the ground. Which could happen. Andrade has her purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but she hasn't always looked that great on the ground. A little brutish. So we'll see. I like Joanne Calderwood. You picking Joanne Calderwood too?
Yeah, without a whole lot of confidence, because I can really, really see her backing herself up to the fence, trying to throw a front kick to get off and just eating 6 punches.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that'll happen. Whether she gets knocked out by it remains to be seen. But what I would really like to see is Calderwood. She's very young. I don't think I even realized how young she is. She's 29. She's actually not as young as I thought. It was actually
she doesn't have a ton of experience. She only has like 4 years of pro
That's what
experience.
I meant to say. It was actually Andrade who was very young. She's 24.
How is that possible, man? It feels like she's been in the UFC for like forever.
Yeah, she's 24 years old. She was born in 91. She's younger than me. But Joanne Calderwood is very inexperienced, and I think we're seeing her have that process where she's really finally coming into her own. I would love to see some more dramatic changes on the same line as the last fight, but you can't know it till it happens. Both going by Calderwood, both a little iffy about it, but I'm really looking forward to seeing it play out. Let's take one more break, Pat, when we come...
Wait. Real quick. One more thing before we take our break in the smorgasbord, Connor. I think you forgot.
CM Punk?
What's your pick on the CM Punk versus Mickey Gall super fight?
The super fight, yeah.
That's what we're calling it, yes.
Mickey Gall by being an MMA fighter. That's really all you can... That's all you can say. And I don't know that CM Punk is bad. What I do know is that the guy is 37 years old. He's never had a fight, and no amount of rigorous training can prepare an MMA novice to fight in front of thousands of screaming fans on a huge pay-per-view main event. And, the guy has no martial arts background. He's not Brock Lesnar, and Mickey Gall's an MMA native. He's young. If we're expecting rapid improvements from someone, it's going to be the guy who's 24 years old with a couple of fights under his belt.
Who fights like kind of an orthodox version of Jim Miller.
Yeah.
Who he trains with.
Yeah.
Mickey Gall, this was one thing I wanted to make sure I snuck in here today. Mickey Gall is a legitimately talented young fighter. He's the kind of guy who, with 7 or 8 fights under his belt, would have found his way to the UFC anyway. Yeah. The fact that he has done so this early is just kind of an anomaly of the circumstances, and not he didn't cut the line to get there. The dude is talented. He was he was competitive in a submission grappling match with jiu-jitsu phenom Gordon Ryan last year. The dude is very, very, very legit.
My fear is that he washes out after this fight if they try to give him a big matchup because he beat the CM Punk and maybe he's not ready for it.
I don't think that they'll do that with him. I think they'll continue to build him kind of slowly, like a more deserving Sage Northcutt.
Sure. Yeah.
But okay, now we can move on.
All right. Now, with your permission, let's take one more break. And when we come back, we got a couple of questions from our listeners to wrap up the show. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Heavy bag time. Let's hear that sound effect. I know everyone loves when I introduce it, right, Pat? I'm led to believe that from our survey that it was a serious point of contention.
Yeah, I would say it was probably 60-40 in the direction of don't introduce the fucking sound effect.
Some of that makes me want to keep doing it. I gotta be honest, but I'll try to make this the last time that I mention the sound effect before I play it. So heavy bag, here we go. Our first question, Pat, comes to us from Axel Holt, who's been a patron of the show on Patreon for some time. Axel asks, which skill is the hardest to teach? I used to think that killer instinct was one of those things you just had to be born with, but you have talked on the show about how it can be taught in training. We just mentioned that with Fabricio Werdum, in fact. Which similar skills are there that are hard to learn? Could Rumble Johnson be taught not to crumble under pressure, or Cerrone not to be a slow starter, etc.?
That is a really, really good question.
Yeah.
I think that the hardest things to teach are timing and distance. And I'm not saying like managing those things. I'm saying the kind of innate understanding of them that can only come from thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions, right? So it's time hitting pads, it's time sparring, it's time spent doing movement drills, things like that. Like there is no substitute for that. To some extent, athleticism can give you those things. If you're a really fantastic athlete, you tend to have really good timing. That's just part of the it's just part of the package that you get there. But I think that especially a sense of the distance is the kind of thing that you only really see in people who have a lot of hours of training under their belt. I think those are the hardest things.
Then there are, of course, little things. I think that that's something that, again, in a lot of ways, that's an experience-bred thing. Having a sense of timing, having a sense of distance. Then there are lots of little tricks that elite fighters use. Like I recall reading once that Roberto Duran used to smack his opponent in the solar plexus with the heel of his hand when he couldn't get a punch off, just to get a little moment of space or time to adjust his position or set up a cleaner, more traditional punch. I know old-time fighters used to throw quote-unquote foul kidney blows, all of which are now foul in boxing, but you used to be able to throw a legal kidney blow with the knuckles. Sugar Ray Robinson used to do that with his patented candy cane punch, his right hook knuckle down to the liver. But they used to chop the liver with the heel of the hand, or like with like a karate chop, that kind of motion, because it's easier to get from more angles. It's like a hammer fist. You don't have to wrap your arm around to land with the knuckles. Little things like that take experience. I'm going to take a slightly different tack and go with what Axel kind of suggested. Things that are sort of fight feel based, but that can actually be specifically taught. Or specifically adapted. Not just like, let's put in a lot of time and eventually you're going to get a feel for this, but how do you specifically train these sort of mental aspects of the game? Like, I'm going to go with his Cerrone example, for example. Donald Cerrone, I think, no longer does as much sparring in his fight camps, but if I recall, I think that Greg Jackson has him basically doing light sparring for several rounds before he goes out to fight. That's the kind of thing that you can work on and I think he's seen sports psychologists and things to address whatever his mental issues may be. But one consistent way that he has found to overcome his problem with slow starting, and it has gotten markedly better recently, is to come out already feeling like he's been in a fight, to sort of simulate what's going to happen with his opponent in the dressing room, warm up, take a few shots, give a few shots, and get his heart racing, not just physically warm up, but warm up his mind to being in front of an opponent with the pressure on. I think those kind of things are very difficult to teach, but it makes it all the more rewarding when you see somebody actually find a way to teach them. Let's address too really quickly about Anthony Johnson. How do you think, just theorizing here, we're not coaches, Pat, but how do you think you might address somebody's issue of crumbling under pressure? The Alistair Overeem change of strategy, change of style we talked about before, but with a guy like say Anthony Johnson in particular, what might solve his issue with crumbling under pressure?
Well, so this is I actually had a conversation about this with Greg Jackson maybe last November. Yeah. When I was in Albuquerque over Thanksgiving, and Greg Jackson's solution to this is just to get his guys really, really, really tired and then put them in uncomfortable situations. So if you have a guy who kind of crumbles when he starts to feel tired, when he starts to feel like maybe he's not in control anymore, you run them up, you put them through a brutal cardio workout, all the way up to 10,000 feet, and then make them hit pads. Then you make them do things that are going to exhaust them further. Make them clinch grapple, make them wrestle.
Sure.
Do things like that. Like, so when they're already in that kind of crazy headspace, you can force them to confront their fears at that point.
Sure. It's like an immersion therapy. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're going to sit in a bath of cockroaches if you're afraid of bugs.
Yeah, so I would say, like, what you do is you put Anthony Johnson through a series of just brutal workouts, and wait until his heart rate is spiking at 150 or 160 or 170 or somewhere in there, and then you force him to defend from his back. You get a guy on his back with both hooks in and say, okay, defend. And I would do that for round after round after round after
And
round.
you might do that with things like that where you can actually apply intensity without having to let the guy take a bunch of shots and actually get knocked out in training. So maybe if you wanted to simulate striking, you could mix in pad sessions to simulate that he's expending energy with his hands, but then have him, when he's actually being pressured by an opponent, have him clinch grappling, have him fighting from his back. With a guy like Anthony Johnson, too, you might actually, to me, it seems like it might be a good idea to try round robin sparring, where it's not just being pressure, but literally a string of fresh, big, strong opponents round after round. It's basically like a worst case scenario. Like, you're not just fighting Daniel Cormier, you're fighting Daniel Cormier, who has been cloned for each of the 5 rounds of the fight, and you have to be just the one guy each time who's going to keep just surviving against him. So yeah, that kind of stuff is very interesting. That's some of the more nebulous areas of coaching that I find to be quite fascinating. So hopefully that gave you some enlightenment on that issue, Axel. And our last question of the day is from Mark Guagenti. And Mark asks, punches. Why are people able, in the context of MMA boxing, to get away with such a low percentage of straight punches? He said that Hector Lombard comes to mind. It seems to basically the crux of Mark's question is that MMA fighters tend to throw more hooking and looping punches than boxers, who rely more on their straight shots. And why is that so? What do you say, Pat?
So my sense of this is that because the gradations of range in MMA are not quite as small as they are in boxing, there is less need for guys to spam 1-2s, though there are guys who do that in MMA and are very successful with it. But also because at the range where you would throw straight punches in MMA, you have a lot more options available to you. So the example that, Connor, that I used with you when we were talking about this when we were deciding whether to answer it or not, was why would you there are very few guys who throw straight rights to the body in MMA. Like, from the exact same range, you can throw more safely a body kick.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things like that basically straight punching range in MMA is also round kicking range.
Right.
And so you have more options available to you there. There's just less. I think you just have more options. There's less strict need for it.
Yeah. It's like it's not like as if in MMA people were taking the back and always going for arm bars. Where it's like, why aren't you going for the rear naked choke? It makes so much more sense. It's in a situation where they have a lot of options at their disposal, right? If you take a guy's back, you have a few things you can do. And that's why when you take somebody's back in MMA, it more or less looks like when you take somebody's back in pure jiu-jitsu. But when you're at distance, there are more options that can complement or replace what you would get from a straight punch. The reason that boxers throw so many straight punches at distance is because that's all they have. That's their longest, safest weapon, and that is what they're going to use to close that distance. And in MMA, you have more tools. Not that a round kick, for example, is going to be better than a straight punch or fulfill the same role, but you have the option of throwing that in addition to your straight punches. I'm not sure I fully agree with the idea that MMA fighters throw, like, even in just the context of MMA boxing, so to speak, that they rely a lot on hooks. I think the implication is kind of that they're kind of wild with their punches. I think the problem there is not that you don't see a lot of those guys in MMA, but that you see a lot of them in boxing too. We have this idea where we take, like, MMA fighters, like, I don't know, we'll look at the striking of someone like CB Dalloway and compare it to, like, the best boxers in the world. We'll compare it to, like, Terrence Crawford. And that's a tough sell. There are a lot of boxers who throw a lot of hooking shots. There are a lot of pre-Robert Garcia Marcos Maidanas out there. No one was really as tough as Marcos Maidana, but with that kind of reckless style training varies, and it's kind of like when you hear people in the MMA sphere say, "Oh, a boxing stance," and I'm always saying, "What is that? What is a boxing stance?" There are 100 different ways to stand that boxers across the world use for a variety of different reasons. But the crux of the matter is that MMA fighters do rely less on straight punches at range simply because they have more things to play off of those straight punches or to use in lieu of them. Fighters, if you take an MMA fighter who prefers his boxing over his kicking game, you will see a lot of straight punches. You're not going to see a dearth of straight punches from guys like Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz
or Michael
Bisping, or like Sean Spencer, who's fighting on this weekend's card. Like, those guys like their boxing, and because that's what they're most comfortable doing, when they're at distance, they throw a lot of straight punches.
Stipe Miocic
is a great example. Yeah, absolutely. So we hopefully that answered your question, Mark. Thank you very much for writing in. We're looking for more questions, too, from our Patreon patrons. If you guys have contributed $5 or more to the show in the last month, then please send us your questions on Patreon. You can send it as a message or a comment on the post we have up on our creator page. And we will be happy to answer those in the show. And even if you're not contributing to the show, we do still sometimes take questions from people on Twitter. So send us a question with the hashtag #HeavyBagQuestions. Hashtag #HeavyBagQuestions. No spaces, no punctuation or anything of that kind. You can capitalize if you like. I happen to think it's polite if you do, but it's really your choice. Pat, how can they get in touch with us on social media? Let's see. You're at Patrick_Wyman. I am at Boxing Bush. What should they check out from you this week in the lead up to UFC 203?
So I will have a number of pieces. I will have a in-depth breakdown of the main event on the Washington Post, complete with GIFs. Then I will have a complete guide to UFC 203 up on Bleacher Report. Then also on Bleacher Report, I will have a business side piece where I went back and I looked at the last 7 years of pay-per-view buy rates and gate receipts for the UFC. So basically, Conor McGregor is the biggest draw the UFC has ever had, and I will be making that case. So
very cool.
Then, and then Fall of Rome podcast, I will have a new episode out probably next Saturday or next Sunday. Also, check out the last episode. It's about the Goths sacking Rome. So if you're into that, check it out.
You prolific bastard. As for me, Sherdog Preview, UFC 203, I am determined to put out the Damian Maia piece that I began last week. I'm determined to put that out this week. I have had tons of fun looking back at the fights of Damian Maia and sort of watching him over time build this anti-MMA jiu-jitsu game. It's perfectly built to just counter what modern MMA grappling looks like, and I find it to be utterly brilliant. And I want to talk about the other aspects of his game that make it so effective. He's not just a guy who goes in there and like dives on takedowns after takedowns. He's not Issei Tamura. He's Damian fucking Maia, and he deserves to be celebrated. And then for UFC 203, I'm thinking of doing a Jimmie Rivera piece, actually. Something on somebody not in the main event, because I'm always talking about the main event fighters, but that should be coming out for me later this week. And that about sums it up. So thank you all for listening to today's episode. Thank you again for sending in questions. Please don't hesitate to send us more, if you, especially if you have contributed to the show on Patreon. And if you're interested in contributing, just search Heavy Hands on Patreon and Google. You'll find it as a top result. Thank you guys very much. Once again, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.